So, getting right to it. Tonight we have Tim Miller, who has a doctorate from the University of Kansas and is a professor of religious studies at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. I'm just going to read this little blurb. Tim Miller's major research focus is the history of intentional communities in America, especially in the 20th century. For his work in this area, he has been recognized by the Communal Studies Association as a distinguished scholar. He, let's see here, he is widely published. Two of his books are on the big table over here, the Encyclopedia of International Intentional Communities, I'm not sure of the exact title, but also the seminal one that we're all mostly familiar with, The 60s Communes, Hippies and Beyond. But he's also written since 1973, Ethics and the Counterculture, a predecessor to the one that I just mentioned, the 60s Communes, is The Quest for Utopia in 20th Century America, 1900 to 1960. And he told me that maybe next year, the third of a trilogy will be published, which will cover the intentional communities from 1975 to the present day. But he is widely published. That's one thing he probably is going to mention, but he has called the Droppers and others in certain communes of the 60s to be secular visionaries. I love that phrase. And I guess I'm going to mention this because it's in Wikipedia, that your son, Aber Miller, is the noted, quote, sweetheart jazz man of Humboldt County, California. Okay, so here's Tim Miller.
Oh man, that Wikipedia thing. As someone else, I don't do stuff like that. Someone else put that up, and I don't know where they got their information, but a lot of it was wrong. And I used to use it as an example to my students of why you shouldn't use Wikipedia. And research is not reliable. And I think it must have been one of my students decided to go in and fix it, and then added that because he knew my son. Funny times. Anyway, great to be here. Great homecoming. We have people from Drop City and Libre and other places here, and those places have been terrifically influential, as we'll get to in a while on me. I began looking at Drop City in a fairly serious way in the 1980s, and soon migrated on to Libre, and it has really propelled my curiosity over all these years, and it's just been terrific for me to get to see these people again and to reflect on what happened. As far as Drop City goes, I want to just relate a couple of anecdotes. Once I got going, I became friends with two of the original founders, Joanne and Gene Bernofsky, and got enough information compiled that I thought I'd write a little historical sketch. And I sent it to your historical journal. I don't even remember the name, but the Colorado State Historical Journal. And, kind of an outline of Drop City history, thinking this ought to be recorded. And I got this very dismissive letter back from them saying, "We are a serious historical journal. We don't deal in weirdos." And then many years later, probably in the 90s, I was in Trinidad and I stopped into the information center there, and I asked a woman there, I said, "Do you have anything on Drop City?" "No." I said, "Does anyone ever ask about Drop City?" And she kind of had a long pause, trying to say, "No." Completely forgotten. Okay, that's 25, 30 years ago, right? Today, this morning, went into the information center in Trinidad and asked essentially the same question. "You got anything on Drop City?" "No." "You know anything about it?" Well, turned out she lived in Trinidad all her life. She lived across the road from Drop City, and she had a high opinion of it. She thought these people were a little quirky, but she liked them. And I don't know. Ambrose Bierce in the Devil's Dictionary says that a conservative is one who worships a dead radical. And I think that's what's going on. Time has gone on, so these radicals now are safe to say positive things about. So 50 years later, here we are, and I'm loving it. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to give you some things that I think kind of show some of the road to Drop City, how we got there. Then look at Drop City itself a little bit. And finally, look at what happened afterwards. I see Drop City as a real pivot. It was well publicized, got into Time magazine after all, and it, I think, was very influential. A lot of things, the great surge of communal living that came in the next few years, I think owed a lot to it. So I'm going to try to look at some of the predecessors and then what happened later. That's the goal here. So to start at the beginning, where did communal living in America start? Maybe I should try to get out of the way. I think you could say, defining it as I do, Plymouth Colony probably one of the first cases of it. If you see an intentional community as a group that is separated from society, pursuing ideals. These people came here with strong religious ideals, and they lived communally for the first couple of years. They were backed financially by some bankers and such in London, and they had the rules set down for them originally, and one of them was they had to have a completely communal economy. And until they kind of got their feet under them, they did live communally at Plymouth. So to my mind, there's an important beginning point right at the beginning of British settlement. If you look up communal histories, you'll see a lot of us skip over that and say it begins with Peter Plakoy, who was Dutch and had a more specific plan. He published a manifesto that laid out a very detailed plan for communal living. And they had an economic base, they had trade agreements worked out, quite an arrangement. Unfortunately, they were Dutch, and about a year after they settled in what is now Lewis, Delaware, the British came through and completely wiped them out and killed most of them, and that was the end of their deal. Anyway, first examples of intentional communities, which I define this way, really. People who are gathered for a purpose, some kind of vision to it. They do live together somehow, either in a common house or in adjacent structures. Some economic sharing, maybe not total, but some kind of economic community to it. They at least at a minimum would own the land in common, something like that. And finally, a critical mass, a certain number of people. And that's a hard one to define, but I think at least 5 people that are not related to each other, plus various children and other relatives and stuff, would be a minimal figure. So, the American story, it takes off more successfully with Johannes Kelpius, who was German, brought a group here, still back in colonial days. These were millennial Christians, but they also had other ideas, various kinds of Rosicrucian and other esoteric ideas. They settled in what was then outside Philadelphia. It's now within the city limits. And they built this main building called the Tabernacle with a little cupola on top. That was an observatory. They had a telescope, actually, and they spent every night scanning the heavens looking for signs of the second coming. They were convinced that it was coming. One time they thought they saw an angel, and they thought that was it. Jesus was right behind the next cloud. But anyway, they went on for years, and only gradually over decades did they finally peter out somewhat. You go to Fairmount Park, which is down in Philadelphia where it was, you can still find this cave, which they say is where the hermit Kelpius lived. I don't think you can document that historically, but it could have been. So anyway, that's a very early one. The earliest one of which we know we have built history, built artifacts left, these buildings, Ephrata from the 1730s. These were Seventh-day Brethren, worshipped on Saturday, and they gathered into what is kind of a monastic order. It seemed like Catholic monasticism, though they were Protestants, and they built these buildings. They were from Germany originally. It was a German language community. And the architecture, I think, looks pretty German to me. But it's still there. And the state of Pennsylvania now preserves it as a state park. And you can go see this community that was active 300 years ago. These, of course, are reenactors, but you can go into the buildings today. This is their meeting hall where they worshiped. It's still there. They were artists and musicians and produced a lot of really impressive work, I think. So the whole idea of artist communes, maybe it owes something to Ephrata. More better known, I think, probably the Shakers come along with Ann Lee. They reached the U.S. from England in 1774. This is not a picture of Ann Lee. There is no known picture of her. This is someone a long time later said, this is what I think she looks like, and channeled Ann Lee and do this picture. So it's the best we have. The Shakers prospered from the 18th century down to the present. There are still 3 living Shakers today, plus 1 novice who is thinking about joining. One of the things they were well known for was celibacy, strict separation of the sexes. So this building at one of their most beautiful villages, Pleasant Hill, Kentucky, those 2 doors, you have a men's door and a women's door, they go to the same place inside. But you cannot go through the same door. That's unnecessary mingling of the sexes. Known for their enthusiastic worship, which went on in the early years into the mid-19th century. A lot of visitors wrote accounts of it and thought these people were possessed by demons or something. Very lively. Of course, very well known for their furniture, and in fact, you talk about communal artists, the Shakers were superb at that. Their furniture was glorious, very simple but elegant in its simplicity, and it is today, again, you wait long enough, things change, right? These things are very valuable today. To get a chair like that at an auction, and there's a lot of Shaker stuff around that goes to auction, you would probably pay at least $5,000 for a chair, maybe more. So people also make reproductions, that's a little cheaper. Anyway, they're very well known for that, so well known that one of the last Shaker sisters some years ago said that she didn't want to be remembered as a chair. Also known for their neatness. I think that's where Dean got it, he keeps his dome very neat. But, chairs are dust catchers. You have a chair, it gets dirty underneath it, then you got to move it to clean it. Why would you do that? You're done using it, hang it up. So all the Shaker buildings have all of these peg things all along all the walls. Another Shaker innovation there at the left. The far left broom is a round one, the standard broom until Shaker times. They decided that if you flattened it out, it worked better. Guess what? It does. Did you ever see a round broom today? No. So, quite a bunch of inventors and artists. Beautiful architecture. Hancock, Massachusetts, a beautiful Shaker village. That barn is not just pretty to the eye, it's actually quite efficient. You can't really see it from this angle, but it's built into a hillside. They did that deliberately so you could drive the hay into the upper level and then throw it down to the cattle and not have to mess with getting it up into the hayloft the way most farmers do. So pretty smart. Number of businesses. There were about 5,000 Shakers at their peak in the mid-19th century. Various products, herbal products, food products were part of their economy. And they were well known for herbs and seeds. They did a lot of seed business. But this is one of their shops that survives. Among other interesting pieces of trivia, they were the largest dealers of opium in the 19th century. That was legal in those days. There are, as I say, 3 plus 1 novice left, and this is where they live today, Sabbath Day Lake, Maine. And they're still struggling. Brother Arnold says they pray daily for more people to join them, which better happen soon. Sister Frances, who's kind of the official leader, she's 88 and not doing well. So, a little bit later, the Hutterites, another major movement come onto the scene. Hutterites were Swiss originally, but they were persecuted like the other Anabaptists, like the Amish and Mennonites, and they fled. They went to Moravia initially, where they were protected for a while. Then they lost their protection there. They went to Russia under Catherine the Great. She wanted them because they were good farmers, and Russia always has agricultural problems. So let's get the farmers here. They went there, lived there for 100 years with special privileges were very important to them. They're pacifists, so they had to have exemption from military duty. And Catherine granted them that. The ability to continue to speak German and to run their own schools, things like that. And with that, they went to Russia. But those privileges were withdrawn in the 1870s, about 100 years later. And with that, they moved to North America, where they lived for, well, they're still very much alive and well. They're closing in on 150 years here in North America. Started out in South Dakota, but in World War I, with the huge surge of anti-German bias that there was, they were essentially chased out of there. Severe persecution, including death of some of their members. And so they fled mainly to Canada, only to be invited back a decade or two later during the Depression, because guess what? South Dakota was struggling agriculturally and needed good farmers once again. So quite a few of them moved back, and as you can see, about 2/3 of them are in Canada today. Absolutely thriving, 50,000 Hutterites in 500 colonies, total communal economy, highly disciplined people, and quite prosperous today. So this is what the colonies look like. People live in what amount to row houses, apartments, and they farm typically 5,000 or 6,000 acres. They still wear what is peasant dress from the 16th century. There's some young people, the way they dress today. Women, old and young, wear polka dot scarves, one of the hallmarks of the Hutterites. Just about the time the Hutterites got going, the Mormons got serious about communal living under Brigham Young. After they moved to Utah, they had dabbled in it before. Joseph Smith, the founder, had proclaimed that Mormons should live communally. And they played with it a little bit, but didn't do it in a very serious way. But Brigham Young in the 1870s said, okay, let's get serious about this. And they built dozens, maybe hundreds of communal colonies in Utah and surrounding areas, and became at that time really the national leaders in communal living. The most notable example of it was this place, Orderville, in southern Utah. The movement was called the United Order Movement, so Orderville. Totally communal economy, and again, pretty prosperous. So, maybe a little light getting. The Mormons, after the death of Joseph Smith, got that? Get a little better with the Orderville here. Yeah, quite organized. Lived a very strictly disciplined life there. After the death of Joseph Smith, the Mormons splintered. People think of Mormons as one unified movement in Salt Lake City, headquartered in Salt Lake City. That's not exactly true. There are probably 500,000 Mormons in other movements, other splinter movements, lots and lots of them around. One of the notable ones, the movement's still going just barely, under James Strang, who claimed to be the successor to Joseph Smith. Strang eventually took his followers up to Beaver Island, Michigan, as you see in the inset picture way up in the north end of Lake Michigan. He had several wives, crowned himself king of Beaver Island. Anyway, many Mormon splitters, and it's an interesting story, but many of them live communally, because you can look it up in the Mormon scriptures. Look up the Doctrine and Covenant, which is one of the Mormon scriptures. It tells you right there, live communally. It's very clear, black and white. So they took it seriously. This is yet another splinter that's active today. They live not too far from where we live. They're in Iowa, but just not far from us in Kansas. They are some of the most dogged people I've ever run into in trying to live without technology. They don't use any kind of machinery except hand tools. So everything here has been done completely. Lumber is cut by hand. It's a very determined back of the land group of people. They go a long ways away to harvest thatch out of a lake to use old-fashioned thatched roofs. Some beautiful buildings they built actually, but they are determined to be simple living people not dependent on all of these modern structures, which after all are going to break down one of these days. Here's how they get power to run their equipment. That classic old power takeoff, run a horse in a circle and take the power out of that. They're still doing it today. Another group, probably better known than the Brotherhood of Christ, the people at Colorado City, Arizona. Warren Jeffs, their leader's been in the news a lot, and their colony in Texas has been in the news. But when polygamy finally was outlawed in the official Mormon church, quite a few new splinters came along saying, no, this is the will of God, we've got to continue doing it, and to this day they continue doing it. Perfect example here, Leroy Johnson, who was one of the leaders of the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. His 5 wives are sitting there in front. All of the rest of those people are his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren.
Oh my goodness.
That's what polygamy can do to a family. We went through there a couple of times, and one thing that really struck me was these gigantic houses. The houses are huge there. And then you see Leroy Johnson's family, and you begin to realize why they need a lot of
Those smaller collectors on the roof of the house.
Yep, sure are. Yeah, definitely. Just to take the story into Colorado a little bit, there have been quite a few communal experiments in Colorado. Drop City certainly wasn't the first. This, I don't know, I couldn't find any pictures of this. The Dutch colony, it was out near Alamosa. A group of Dutch settlers intended to build their own society out in the San Luis Valley. Unfortunately, these 2 articles tell you the sad part of the story. They were defrauded. The person who sold them the land defrauded them flat out, and they lost everything when they thought they bought their land and were poverty-stricken. And then an epidemic, the right-hand one tells you about the epidemic that hit. Thank you. And it's, I don't know if it collapsed in great disaster. Great vision, but it didn't work out. Colorado Cooperative Company out of Nucla, they united on the basis of common agriculture, but to do that they needed water, right? They needed irrigation, so they united to build an incredible irrigation system, many miles, some of it on a flume up over a river valley and stuff, tremendous effort. Pieces that are still there, you can go out and look at that today. Anyway, the whole thing highly cooperative for many years. Once they got it all done and got the agriculture going, they got more prosperous and went into private property. Fort Amity, Salvation Army tried to take people out of the cities and put them into communal colonies, agricultural colonies, and Fort Amity was one of them. That's out near Holly in eastern Colorado. That's all gone today. It had ran into terrible agricultural problems, and the Salvation Army diverted some of its resources elsewhere, and they eventually dissolved it, and it's gone today. But yet another Colorado example. Are they still going today? Yeah, the emissary communities founded in the 1940s. Have you ever heard of the emissaries? Yeah? Okay, they're up at Loveland, up near Fort Collins. And they're quite alive and well today. They are, I would call them a New Age spiritual community. And one of the things that they do, they call attunement. They think that you can essentially line your vibrations up, your body up in a certain way, and it will improve everything about you. Your physical health, your emotional, mental health, what have you. So there's a woman getting attuned. No touching, just an energy flow. I don't know how many people know this today, but Greeley was founded as a community, and it was led by a man named Nathan Meeker. So his house is now, some of you have probably seen it, a local museum up there. It was a temperance colony. One of the big points of Greeley was to have no alcohol in town. So a town sprang up right outside their property that was full of bars. But that went on for a number of days, not true today. I think they gave that up. But, another colony, Cotopaxi, some of you know of that probably up by Canyon City. It was a Jewish colony in the 1880s. There was a huge immigration of Jews into America in the 1880s, following persecutions in Eastern Europe. And the existing American Jews helped settle a lot of them in communal farming colonies. And Cotopaxi was one of them. Basically, it didn't last but a year or two because the people there couldn't take the winters. Pretty tough up there. And so it dissolved and Cotopaxi went a different way. But if you go to the cemetery there today and look around for a few minutes, you'll find some gravestones in Hebrew still there from the colony. Artist colonies, I think something very much a direct predecessor to Drop City and Libre and others. One of the early ones in America started by this man who was, I think, a showman as much as an artist, Elbert Hubbard. He built what was called the Roycroft community in New York State near Buffalo. And for about 20 years or so, they had a very active community of the arts, very much run by Hubbard himself. Did a lot of publishing. He wrote much of the stuff that they published. That was his magazine. It had huge circulation in the 1890s, early 1900s. This is one of his short books that had huge circulation. They said it sold millions of copies. Inspirational tract. They did a lot of artwork. This is arts and crafts era, so a lot of arts and crafts stuff, like lamps like this were from Roycroft, or these lamps, a lot of glass work. Very good art came out of that communal place in late 19th, early 20th centuries. This pottery was another thing that they did. Elbert Hubbard died in 1915. He went down on the Lusitania. And so just almost 100 years ago, practically to the day from right now. And with that, the colony kind of went downhill. But there's still artists working there and using the buildings as private artists. So that's what the place looks like today. Rose Valley, another artist colony in the arts and crafts period in Pennsylvania, outside Philadelphia. Some artists and some patrons they did have outside support found a couple of old abandoned mill buildings in a small river valley and turned them into great artists' workshops. This building is still there. They, as you see, have turned it into the town hall of Rose Valley, which is an independent suburb. And their legacy is all over the place. The buildings that they built are classics of arts and crafts, architecture, beginning to verge into Art Nouveau. Things like this. And lots of that is still there at Rose Valley today, though the community eventually dissolved. It became private. Bird Cliff in New York State, same thing. Also had a prominent patron. Ralph Radcliffe Whitehead was a wealthy Englishman who basically paid the freight. You're a good artist, you come here, do your art, and I'll pay for it, support it. Guess what? He had a lot of takers. And, for some years, they really prospered. Built at his expense a lot of buildings to live in and work in. I think one of the problems they had, though, he had the idea that eventually they'd be self-sufficient from their art, and in the arts and crafts spirit of the time, one of the things they did was furniture. What they didn't really count on was getting it to market. They were not even near a railroad, which you had to be to go to market in those days. It was awkward and hard, expensive to market your materials to get it to New York City. And that, as much as anything, caused it to close down. But for a few years, it was a lively scene. Woodstock, New York, where they were, is still an art center today. And that's Bird Cliff is what started it. A colony started it there. More recently, Quarry Hill in Vermont. In the 1940s and 50s, a couple bought some land and said, we want artists to come join us. And they did, and built their own houses, and basically just lived a very freewheeling, semi-unorganized life, although they do have a communal spirit to them, and the land is owned in common. But that's alive and well more than 50 years after its founding. So lots of things going on. Arcosanti, another artist colony down outside of Phoenix, north of Phoenix. The Italian, I would say a visionary architect and artist, Paolo Soleri, proposed that we build a community that would be self-sufficient. He's envisioned several thousand people living in a way that they could live in the desert and make it all work. Very efficient use of water and things like that. Anyway, Arcosanti has followed his vision. They're still working on it today. To finish his vision off, I think is really ambitious. The part that you've just seen is right about here. And look at what is envisioned altogether. Most of
Climbed
that,
out a bit since last time I saw that.
yeah?
It was a lot taller than the original design.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, whether that'll ever be done or not, I don't know, but yet another visionary community of artists. Then we get into the late 50s, early 60s, a different kind of community. Ken Kesey, who was, of course, a successful writer, with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest particularly, volunteered for some of the early LSD experiments. In the early days of LSD, experiments were conducted by the military, by the CIA, by the FBI. They all wanted to see if this could be useful in their work, but they had to experiment and see how it worked. So Kesey volunteered and became a lifelong acid head. And gathered around him a group of people, became known as the Merry Pranksters, and they had a pretty good time together. Some of you probably read Tom Wolfe's book on them, right? The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. And it evokes their spirit tremendously, I think. Full of art and full of action and pretty crazy. But this is, of course, their famous trip to the New York World's Fair in 1964. So all of this stuff, the culture's beginning to shift, you know. Things are going to be different from here on out. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. Okay, well, this is where they lived initially, the Merry Pranksters. Out of the proceeds of the book, Ken Kesey bought this house in La Honda, California, and it was overrun with this rather disorganized group living off of Kesey mainly. Another different sort of early LSD-inspired community, Millbrook in New York State. Ralph Metzner there on the left and Timothy Leary on the right were very serious spiritual explorers. They saw LSD as being a great tool for spiritual insight. And they had a lot of people following their idea, including the Hickok brothers and sister. There were three of them. And they were heirs to the Mellon family fortune, and among other things, they owned this little cabin up in New York State. This house has 64 rooms, and they just turned it over to Leary and Company and said, let's have a visionary community here. And they did. And again, wealthy patrons, the Hickoks basically paid for it and floated the whole thing. But a lot of artwork going on, and of course the whole psychedelic spiritual experiments. That went on for a number of years till the government finally shut it down. But you know, LSD until 1966 was legal, and this stuff was going on before that, so not much the government could do about it. So they had to outlaw it. Gorda, if you drive up the Coast Highway in California, you will come to Gorda. Not much there, but I include this because it was one of the first open land communities, 1962. A woman named Newell, Amelia Newell, opened her land and said anyone can come settle here. And guess what? Lots of people did. Beautiful thing, the Big Sur Coast. And it ran for about 5 or 6 years. It might have gone on for a long time, but the neighbors were absolutely outraged with all these beatniks and hippies around, and finally forced them out of business. They did things like cut off their water supply and basically forced them out. So if you go to Gorda today, you don't see Gorda Mountain Commune, you see Gorda Store. Another thing that predates Drop City, Tolstoy Farm in Washington State, 1964. So we're getting close here. Tolstoy Farm was planted on some land that was given to this fellow, Piper Williams. And he opened his land, he said, for all who wanted to live there. There was only one rule that he proclaimed, and that was that no one could be asked to leave. With a rule like that, you're going to attract some deadbeats, and they did. But guess what? For all of that, Tolstoy is still there. Quite a few people still living there. It's pretty disorganized. You want to live there, you have to build your own house. So there are places like this around the property. Not exactly luxurious living, but they're still there and still doing it, and they still have some commonality to them, like they own a dairy cow that they share, and milk and so forth. They built this school out of concrete. Interesting architecture. Just about the time Drop City got going, here comes the hog farm with Wavy Gravy. Probably first came to fair prominence at Woodstock, where he was still known as Hugh Romney. Wavy Gravy came slightly later. They were hired at Woodstock as the police force to enforce good behavior. And they did it in a pretty compassionate way. You know, Woodstock was famous for not devolving into violence and major problems, you know. 3 days of peace and love. Right? Anyway, the hog farm is another one that goes back to this era and is very much still going. They had their own bus, kind of in the spirit of Ken Kesey. And one of the things they have done in later years is, I think they're still doing it, running Nobody for President. And remember the election, when was it, 96 or whatever, when there was that, you know, where it was in abeyance for several days. No one was quite sure who won because the Supreme Court hadn't put in the fix yet. And suddenly they changed their sign here. Nobody for president. Hey, nobody won. This was nobody's, what would you say, material side. I think they called Pegasus. Pegasus carried around with them. Anyway, Wavy's still there. Hog Farm is still there. They have 2 centers, one in Berkeley, one up in northern Mendocino County, part of northern California. And every summer, Wavy's still, he's 79 years old now, he's still running a clown camp for children. You want your kid to become a clown, send him out to Wavy's place. You'll get the instruction. They also have their city place. And they have 1 week, if you're interested in learning to be a clown, Wavy has 1 week out of the summer that's the adult clown camp. So you can still go make a fool of yourself if you want to.
Way to do that.
Yeah. So with that, we're at 1965 and Drop City. And this is the complex that is, I think, probably the most pictured structure at Drop City. It started, though, with 3 people and 4 pretty soon. Gene Bernofsky, whom I've known for a good 30 years now. He was a photographer and filmmaker then, and he still is. This is a recent picture of Gene. He makes environmental movies today. There he is at Drop City. There's Joanne, his wife. Here she is at home in Montana recently. Here she is at Drop City with her daughter May, who was born while they lived at Drop City in '66, I believe. And Clark Rickert, who has spent his life career in painting, a trained painter, and happens to be with us here tonight. And so I think many of you know Clark. Incidentally, what I'm going to say is largely informed by the fact I've known the Bernofskys for so long. So Clark, if I'm really way off track, tell me, okay?
Okay, I might correct you on something.
Okay. But there's Clark at Drop City on the left, I think, with Carol DiGiulio on the right.
No, that is a mistake. That is, her name is Carol Rickert. She
Really?
is-
It's not
yeah.
Carol DiGiulio?
No, Carol DiGiulio just died.
She just died,
2 weeks
yeah.
ago. This is not Carol DiGiulio.
Oh, really?
Right, so that is Carol Rickert, my sister-in-law.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. I'm going to have to get on Joanne about that. She was late.
She probably thought it was Carol DiGiulio. It's not.
Well, she had Carol DiGiulio's death on her mind, I know that.
Yeah, she just died.
Okay, well, okay, now you have the correction, good. So what's the communal background here? Well, for the Bernofskys, both of them, they were both red diaper babies. They grew up in communist families. Their parents, both of them, were dedicated communists, members of the party. Gotcha.
And Gene's full name is Eugene Victor Debs Bernofsky.
And his brother's name is Karl Marx Berkowski. Yeah. And not to be outdone, Joe's name, why is her name Joanne? What's Joe for? Joe Stalin.
Oh.
That's really right. So, I mean, that's the culture they came from. So, communism, cooperation, common enterprise, that was something they grew up with. Clark came from Mennonite roots in Kansas, and I think there's some cooperation there that has to play into it all. Mennonites have a long history of working together, and this, I think, represents one of the things I like most about them. They have these very developed quilting projects and things, and once a year in Kansas they have a big auction and they sell their artwork, their quilts and other things. They get very good prices for them, and all the money goes to relief charities, famine relief, flood relief, hurricane relief, stuff like that. Very compassionate people still. So all of that, I think, informs this to some degree. It's kind of what you grew up with. You may reject it in some ways, but you stick with it in some ways too. So they all end up going to school at my school, University of Kansas. And Gene and Clark end up living in a loft on Massachusetts Street, the main drag of Lawrence. And there they create drop art. Why drop art? Well, it's dropping down from above. And here is one of the dropper projects. Simply suspend a shoe from a rope and then just see how people respond. That's a part of it.
Well, the shoe is not just stationary, it's swinging large arcs. Which really annoyed the piano store owner. He came out and started swabbing at it with a broom. There's no words exchanged, just swabbing. We're up to laughing.
1962, though, this is new stuff. Hippies hadn't come along yet, but they're helping it happen, I think. Another one of their projects, put a breakfast out on the sidewalk and then just watch what they do. And, you know, walking down the sidewalk in 1962, this is freaky stuff.
What they did is they stayed as far from it as they could. Until finally one guy on a bicycle rode right through it.
Did they paint it, or what did they do with people's reactions
This was right in front of the main hotel in Lawrence, Kansas, the Eldridge Hotel. So the hotel goers were rather surprised to see the city on the pavement in front of the hotel. And as far as I can tell, they didn't like it.
It's the town's ritziest hotel, you know. And here are these beatniks. That was then, this is now Richard Conway. I do have the right picture there, don't I?
But that's really current now. Let's even got my current glasses.
Now picture him partly because he wasn't there on day one, but he came very soon thereafter and definitely helped also shape Drop
he
City.
was there, in a way, he was there in day minus about 7 or 8.
Is
So
that right?
Before we purchased the property, Richard was already helping us scrounge materials for the project.
Okay.
So I counted him from the beginning.
Well, I knew he was there from early times. So they began, to scrounge things and build things. This is one of the fairly early structures. And they got to be pretty good at scrounging and coming up with innovative design. Things changed a little bit when Steve Bear showed up on the scene with some visionary architectural ideas of his own. Clark, I believe, had gone to Denver to hear of Buckminster
It
Fuller.
was Boulder.
Boulder.
University of Colorado had the World Affairs Conference. They invited big name people at the time, like Marshall McLuhan and Buckminster Fuller. And so when we bought the property, I say we bought the property, but Gene says he bought the property. But I say we did because he spent $450 on the property, but right about the same time, I spent $500 on the water supply. So I said we bought the property.
Okay.
But anyway, our initial idea when we purchased the property was that we were going to build A-frames. And then I attended the lectures by Buckminster Fuller, and I came back and I said, let's build domes instead of A-frames. So we decided to build domes instead. And one of the domes, I got to tell the story, one of the domes, actually the first winter of Drop City did not meet your criteria for a commune, because in the first winter of Drop City there was just one residence, and that was me. And it was a cold winter, and so the third dome, the largest dome that was ever built there, was built by me single-handedly in that winter.
The theater dome?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then one day, after the wooden structure was up, this insane madman drives up in his Volkswagen, and he looks at that dome, and he jumps out of his Volkswagen, runs toward the dome, starts climbing up the dome. And then I yell out and I say, hey, don't climb up there, you can hurt yourself. He said, oh, no, this is a geodesic dome. They are strong, I will not hurt myself. I said, well, look at the struts you're standing on. There are two by fours put end to end. And he looks down and he sees what it is, and he freezes.
There you can see that.
There, yeah. So there, you can see those struts are not one single board, but they're two short boards put together.
Yeah.
So anyway, he climbed down off the dome very carefully. And he said he had an idea for us, and we would be interested. You'll probably show his first zone, which is not a geodesic dome. It's a structure that's based on polyhedron known as the zonahedron.
But it had an advantage of being manipulable into different shapes and things.
Right, so the dome, a geodesic dome is based on the subdividing of a triconahedron, and the zone that he was proposing was based on a subdivision of the rhombic dodecahedron. There it is. That's it.
Yeah.
So rhombic dodecahedron is an isometric structure that you can stretch it or expand it along the sets of parallel lines. So this is an expanded, stretched rhombic dodecahedron.
So
First zone.
anyway, he, yes, contributes a lot to the future of Drop City. So there's Steve Bear recently, his wife Holly. And suddenly we have a different kind of structure there. So different ways of building and then putting a dome on top, but domes became what Drop City was known for.
I should say one thing on this blue dome. That was painted by Dean and Linda Fleming, here tonight.
Dean's
Their
here.
Dean is here.
Yeah. No, I understand Dean contributed a lot of color to Drop City.
There's someone else here from Drop City, Peggy Abbott and George Xano.
Great. All right.
I was four.
Saying you're going to get to it, but why, Clark, did you go to Drop City?
Why is what?
What was the motivation to even go from Kansas to Drop City?
Well, it's mixed. We had started Drop Art, so everything we did we would call Drop Art. So we called Drop City a work of art. Big live-in work of art. That's one story. Another story is we wondered, what are we going to do after we graduate from college? We're going to get a job. And so
What,
we decided against going to get a job. We decided self-sufficiency.
That was for art purposes.
But we called it a work of art from the beginning.
Yeah.
Can you tell the McDonald's story?
Can I tell a quick story?
Yeah.
This is a little bit off topic, but I graduated from college, and I was an early Gen X type, moving in with my parents, and which was okay with my mother, but my father was not too pleased with me living there. So my mother would give me a nice breakfast every morning, poached egg and bacon. But my father every morning would put one ads next to my orange juice glass.
And I applied for job after job, failed, and finally I got a job at McDonald's, paid 50 cents an hour. And so I went to work at McDonald's, and I was given the task of being the bun toaster. Toasted buns on a griddle. And then I had this, there was this spatula, I was supposed to take the buns off the grill, but instead they just all fell back onto the grill. And so I would try to pick them up, I'd burn my fingers. So then I'm sorry for taking so long, it was a lot of longer. So then I devised a way to pick them up, which was by putting my fingers in through the top of the bun and looking off this way. And then the manager came up to me after my third day of employment, and he told me the customers were complaining about the holes in their buns. They said, some people have it and some people don't, but you don't have it. You're out of it. So I kind of limped home. I walked home and I was thinking, oh my God, what am I going to tell my dad? I got fired from McDonald's. And I never told him that because I reached into the mailbox and it turned out that the Tandy Corporation of America was giving me a commission to do a painting, which appeared in Time magazine too. It was really full page in Time. And they also sent me a nice big check. So guess what I did with the check? I said goodbye to my parents. And I moved to Colorado. And I didn't tell my dad, Dad, I got fired from McDonald's. I said, Dad, look at this. I got a check from the mail, a big check. So that was my way of getting to Colorado.
Well, anyway, domes, zones. I think this was Peter's dome.
That's Peter's, I'm painted by the Flemings.
And there's your theater dome. This is a picture I took long after Drop City was done.
Yeah.
Kitchen dome. And the complex you've seen. There's the interior.
There's Peter Rabbit sitting in the foreground. And back there drinking, one thing we could not afford at Drop City was beer. But back there in that picture, I'm drinking a beer, I believe. So every once in a while, I read it, we get enough money together to buy a case of beer. Okay.
Anyway, this is Drop City. I like this sign that was near there. They were so popular, so much visited. People advertise, come see us after you're done. Did you get a commission of ice cream out of that?
Yeah, all the free ice cream that we flooded.
Pretty good deal. This is one of the sketches of it that survives in part. You can see it was damaged by the time it was shown to me. Another drawing, a little better shape.
This was French art.
But just a quick run through, there was lots of art, a lot of it made from salvaged materials. Being bag that Gene and Park did together. One, what I think of as a very early underground comic book with text that is not exactly linear. Interesting drawings. The ultimate painting that several of them I understand worked on, and it could be spun under a strobe light. Gave pretty interesting visuals.
Quick story on that, elaborate a little bit. We were invited by Robert Rauschenberg, who's a famous artist, to show this painting in a show in New York at the Brooklyn Museum called the EAT show, meaning Engineering, Art, and Technology. So we took it to New York and we built a dome in the Brooklyn Museum and had the painting spinning in the Brooklyn Museum. And then the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver heard about this and they asked us to recreate it So I recreated the painting for the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver a few years ago. And now the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis wants to show it in their museum. So in October, there's going to be another showing of the old painting in the Dome, the Willow Dome Museum. There will be a painting in the Dome. And then it's going to travel around to several museums after that. So it's not dead yet.
This is later. And need to mention Peter, I think Peter Rabbit, who joined them, not at the very beginning, but definitely put his stamp on the place. Very engaging with visitors. And as I understand it, the chief architect of the Joy Festival in 1967. Inviting all people to come in. I don't think it was massive, but anyway, that was the summer of love. And Drop City had its part. But the aftermath, this is one of the times I visited, and these are the kinds of fragments there were. Not even that today. Just want to say one thing about the domes themselves. How did they get all of these colorful pieces to make the domes? Go back to the complex. How did you get all of that? Well, they chopped roofs out of cars with big axes. Just chopped them out, get big pieces of metal. There's not a huge market, I think, for metal like that, so the junkyard dealers were willing to give it to them pretty cheaply. And with that, put them on the frame, and there you go. You've got it.
If you flip back a couple of frames to the car top dome, the one we called the car top dome, that's the car top dome. So that's all made out of mixture skin is all made out of car tops, chopped out of cars, and costing a dime a piece. So the total cost for that dome, the way I tell the story, was $7. When Richard Cawley is around, he gets infuriated when I say $7. He said, $7? That was just the cost of the car metal. You forget the screws. That was another $7. It was $14. So I lived in that dome for 3 years, and the total cost of the dome was $14.
Pretty good.
That would bring, right?
The frame is, there's no wood structure underneath it.
Right.
It's just car steel. Sheet,
Steve Barrett said they leaked. Did it leak?
Well, the studio I live in now leaks. So I used to leaks for a long time. I don't live in my studio, but the studio that I painted has leaks. I think I've known leaks my entire life. So I don't remember a cup being leaking more than other buildings I've been familiar with. So that's a big myth about domes, is that they leak. But from my experience, what are you talking about leaking? I don't know anything that doesn't leak.
Tim,
Yeah.
one thing you said 67 was the summer of love. I recall that it was 66, and I also recall 67 was the year that they carried the coffin down Haight Street.
That was the fall of '67, but it was the end of the summer of love. Yeah, that's true. No, I'm quite sure of that.
That was the death of the hippie. The same year God died, and also art was pronounced dead too. And painting. So what I said is, painting died, and we are now in painting heaven, and it's great. I love it.
So,
What was the famous music festival in '67 in California?
The being,
The music festival in California in
the
'67.
being.
the human being, that was in 66, wasn't it? January of 66, I think.
Wasn't the Monterey Festival?
January 7, 67.
Was it 67?
Or no, maybe it was 66. 67.
Maybe it didn't happen.
When was the Monterey Pop Festival?
That's what I was,
That was probably about
that was 67.
67 or so, I don't know about that. Want to know what Drop City looks like today?
Sad.
Storage, little truck parts and things. Just have to say a word about this. Any of you seen this book, Drop City?
Don't spend any money on it, do not.
This is insulting, absolutely outrageous. There are a number of things that are really offensive about it. One is that it really libels Drop City. Why it uses that name, I don't know. It's not about Drop City at all. There's a very vague mention at one point in the book that says, oh, there was an original Drop City in Colorado, but this book is set in California. There was no Drop City out there. And it's really about Morningstar Ranch, which was a commune started in '66 in Northern California. And if you know about Morningstar Ranch, that is what you see in the book, except they libel and slander all of these people that were at Morningstar Ranch. They even use names that are just 1 degree removed from their actual names. It's terribly insulting, it's inaccurate, it uses ridiculous stereotypes. And just in case anyone has any doubt, when it came out, I read it and I was really offended, and I sent a copy to Gene, and Gene threatened to sue the publisher and Boyle and everyone else. He was absolutely outraged about it and ranted and raved, as Gene is good at doing. And then I showed it also to Ramon Sender, who is kind of the leader of the people who are still around from Morningstar Ranch. He was similarly outraged. He said, this is nothing like what it was like. This is deeply insulting. He wrote to Boyle. He wrote to the publisher. And there was a huge fracas about it. For all of that, this book is done very well.
Who else wrote Boyle was my sister. She was also infuriated.
Really, yeah. I have not yet met anyone connected with either one of those two things that liked it at all. It's just ridiculous. But anyway, just in case you have questions about that.
You know, John Curl wrote a good book about Drop City.
What?
John Curl.
John Pearl has a recent book. Of course, the first book was Peter's. But,
And that also was a fabrication.
well,
Peter's.
Peter told me that he was repeating in his own way stories that Roberts told.
In his own way.
The memoirs, yeah, I agree with John Curl's is really good.
Yeah, I thought so.
The library.
Nobody mentions it, but that's the best one.
Yeah, it's a copy over in the library next door.
And Droppers, I think that's the one,
That's the chamber notes.
Gene Renarski one is also very good.
Is it?
Yeah,
Let me see how I get to.
at least it seems to be built on so much what's in the
How do I
documentary.
get to this? Move on a little bit. It won't go very long.
Is that your photograph?
Of the book. I can't get to a second file. Well,
He's good behind.
oh, okay. There's another file. No, it's on the desktop. Yeah, this one, right there. Yeah.
Clark, some of the architect people was wondering how you did seal the car tops. Did you use anything at all to protect?
Well, we, all of them, I think they were all sealed by the same method. We put down a kind of a tar-soaked gauze, and then we spread a roofing material which was called illumination. So it was like aluminum colored tar. We spread that over the skin.
started, we just put on a little bit more tar. Really colored tar.
I want to hear the real story about the gold car top.
Yeah.
Where was that car?
Did that really happen?
It's hard to be certain it didn't, but I'm fairly certain it did not happen. But they came back and they went out to get car tops and they came back. They said, we chopped the car off of a gold No, I think the way the story went is they started chopping.
It's what, they only
Started
got halfway
chopping.
through and
And
then
then
they
they
got scared.
But I do not believe the story. I've inquired of some of the people that were supposedly there, and they more or less pretty much backed off of the story.
Yeah, chopped a beautiful brand new Cadillac car top. No, I don't think so.
It was a fun idea.
Yeah. I just want to say a little bit about things that came later. Libre, of course, very importantly. Dean and Linda and Peter, founders of Libre, were all at Drop City in one capacity or another, visiting or living. And in 1968, got land of their own up in Huerfano County and began to build. So this is an early picture of Dean's Dome, which is still kind of a landmark of Libre, although it looks a little different today. When I first was in touch with Dean and he invited me up to visit, he gave me directions and he said, when you see what is obviously a hippie structure, you'll know you were there. And this is what I saw first. He was absolutely right. It's got some very beautiful architecture there. Libre, of course, over its, going on 50 years now, has had a chance to do some really beautiful work. But still, the domes are there in many cases. A later picture of Dean's Dome, and then a still later one, expanded with a bedroom and art studio and things like that. Sibylla's house, as it is today, wasn't built by her, but today with, I think Dean, didn't you, or Sibylla, didn't you tell me it was stacked railroad ties for the main construction?
Yes, Pat who built that house is here.
I
It's
built
here, yeah. Is that right? Is it railroad ties?
Yes, and this man who was, really wanted to be a painter, and he really admired Dean and Steve, and he would bring up, he worked at the sawmill, and he'd bring the ends of railroad ties up every night. And then we just toenail them together,
Wow.
and then we felted it and wired it and mudded. It was real mud, not stucco at the time.
Well, you must have done a good job, still going, right?
Yeah, it's still there.
So there they are, the first time I visited. Another house. I was told the story of that window was simply someone found that, and you lived there a while, right, Sibylla?
That was my original house that my husband built and I helped him build it.
Made up 1 by 12.
Yeah, it's built on
Yeah.
1 by 10.
1 inch lumber.
That's what we could afford.
Flexies.
Well, if you get a good deal on it, you use it, right?
Yes, well, we made a nail structure out of them, so the struts were like much stronger than 2 by 4, so, they never use homes.
Yep, yet again, creative scrounging.
And that's, what was interesting, below that window, there was a trapdoor and the bed came out on the porch up there and they could sleep outside.
The
Very
bed,
nice.
yes, the bed rolled down with the wall segment.
Very nice.
So you could sleep under the sky.
And did you build this outhouse also?
Yes.
I've never understood an outhouse at 9,000 feet elevation without sides. A little chilly on that winter night, but there's Dean's outhouse, much more comfortable. You sit there and look out over the whole Sangre de Cristo range. Another house, a little better shape, maybe a little more conventional, maybe.
Built fancy.
Yeah. Yes, this is later. Linda and Michael wrote this more recently. Quite a few of Dean's paintings, he's continued his career. And this, I believe, this is the painting in Kansas City, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Tamara and I went to the Nelson Art Museum, the big art museum in Kansas City just a few weeks ago. You turn a corner there, walking down, looking at the galleries, and bam, there's Dean's painting, and immediately know that's who that is. The Libre artwork's all over the place, and I think some of this would have been at Drop City had it gone longer, maybe. I mean, there was a lot of creative energy there that people left for various reasons. It bled over into New Mexico. This is a recent map, someone trying to see how many communes were there in New Mexico. Starting in the 1880s, this person found 51 of them. Many of them in northern New Mexico, like this one, pretty obviously patterned after Drop City.
The initial name of that was Drop South. The moment they changed the name to Monero Nuevo.
Okay.
Does Steve Barrett live there now?
No, I don't think this,
He
did
lives
he have
in
anything to do with
Corrales.
this?
Well, those buildings are based on, those are zones, mayor zones.
And nearby, the Lower Farm at the same time, U.S. Grant, who was running for president, later involved in double murder. Nice
He was
guy.
a maniac.
Yeah. Not too far away, the Llama Foundation, they're building their own dome early on. Steve Durkee, one of the major movers, Steve and Barbara, husband and wife, major moving forces. He left, we interviewed him some years later, and he said he just thought it was too loose. He wanted disciplined spirituality. So he became a serious Muslim Sufi. Still is that today, as far as I know. But the Lama Dome goes on, Sufi dancing goes on,
He was a
meditation.
good builder.
Excuse me?
Excuse me. He was a really good builder.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
They were beautiful structures.
Yeah, definitely.
He invented the word zone, by the way.
Steve
Durkee
Baird
did. No, Durkee did.
Durkee did?
Yeah.
Huh, okay, that's good. Sam Lewis, an early resident, Sufi Sam, one of the early Sufi leaders in America, very influential there. He's buried there. Ram Dass came not too long afterwards and became, of course, a dominant president. He was dominant wherever he went. Published his book, Be Here Now, which was the financial mainstay of Libre for decades. This book sold millions of copies, and the royalties until very recently, it's still in print, until very recently went to Lama Foundation. New Buffalo, not too far away. People admired the Indians a lot, and also the early Spanish, and wanted to make this traditional. But why New Buffalo? Because they wanted it to be everything to all people, just as the buffalo had been to the Indian people. Teepees and adobe structures. Things, lots of mixing mud, because you had to make a lot of adobe bricks. The garden, the people. Some jewelry made there, one of the many ways they tried to make a little money. Later on, it was abandoned, and there's a whole series of changes happened, but this fellow, Bob Fees, bought it with this great idea that he was going to take it back to the original. He really admired the original energy there and reconstructed it. I was there when he was pretty far along on the reconstruction, and basically spent a whole lot of money doing it, and he himself got into health issues. And as of a month or two ago, it was for sale again, last I knew. So if you want to buy a hippie commune that's been rehabbed, talk to Bob Fees. Morning Star, the California Morning Star, ended up going to New Mexico in part, and again, just like before, they built with adobe, built these simple structures. This is Pam Reed, who lived at both Morning Star, California and Morning Star, New Mexico, with children in tow the whole time. Right next door to Morning Star East was Reality Construction Company, a hardcore left-wing political commune, also building with adobe. Another commune north of Taos called Lorien. That went on for a while, but kind of collapsed in disorganization. It regrouped somewhat as LILA, the Lorien Institute of Life Arts. And then the idea, to my mind, goes on to a fair extent today up at Crestone, where the Baca project, many of you know about this, of course, land has been donated to groups to build their spiritual communities, and there are lots of them up there. And by then, it's spreading nationwide. By the late 60s, certainly when the family of the Mystic Arts shows up on the cover of Life magazine, you can imagine they were inundated with people. A whole separate set of communes being built in the Northeast. Raymond Mungo and his commune Packard Corners, the story is told in his book, Total Lost Farm. Excuse me, and it's, I think, a very evocative account of it all. So that's out of order. Anyway, Morning Star in California, Lee Gottlieb made a lot of money with the Limelighters, mainly because they had a well-paying Coca-Cola commercial. And, he bought this land and declared it open to all, and this is the one that is so brutally mischaracterized in the Drop City novel. Morning Star, open land, build your own place and live there. There's Pam again. She said her father was a lifelong subscriber to Time magazine, where this picture appeared, and was absolutely outraged that his daughter was in there and he couldn't show it to his friends. So, Ramon, the longest resident there, I believe, and Ramon is still kind of the spiritual head of the descendants of Morning Star today. They have a newsletter, they stay in touch, and they're still very much, the idea is there. When the county came down on Gottlieb, bulldozed Morning Star, Bill Wheeler, who lived nearby, said, well, come on over to my place, and that became a successor. And again, people built their own idiosyncratic structures. One of the residents wrote this book, Living on the Earth, about how to live communally and make your own way survive. This book became a spectacular bestseller. She made a lot of money from it, gave most of it away. Bull and Polly Ranch, a little bit farther south. Black Bear Ranch, a radical place in Northern California, quite remote, an old gold mining camp. Carista, which comes from that same era, a group marriage commune. Carista saw itself as creating heaven on earth, and it was a group marriage, very organized group marriage. They had a sleeping schedule, and you simply rotated partners on a schedule. They did that for years. It went on for probably 20 years. The farm in Tennessee, Stephen and Ida Mae Gaskin. Stephen, the spiritual teacher in San Francisco, who took his people to Tennessee. Mary is giving his Sunday morning sermon. Ida Mae, meanwhile, becomes a skilled midwife, and that clinic is very much there today. Lots of people out farming at the farm, lots of weddings at the farm. Today at Eco Village, they're trying to show people alternative construction. This is an interesting one to me, dirt bags. Take these heavy bags, fill them with dirt, stack them up. Pretty cheap way to build, and very durable, works well. So anyway, it can go on and on, but that's a little look. Thank you, Clark, for filling in on this extra show. So, I don't know, what do you want to do, Tom? I've gone on way too long.
No, well, that's fine. If you have questions, that's great. Or comments? People are here.
Okay.
Anna?
You didn't